Sweet. All right. We're jumping into our main topic this week. It's going to be certainly an interesting one, and we're going to try to tackle it at different angles for sure. I know Dave's got plenty of input. We kind of chatted back and forth, but we're talking about what is the end game to collecting? Not just video games, right? We want to showcase collecting multiple things, all sorts of different media. What is the end game of that, essentially?
What do you think, Keith? I know
To
you're
have
going
the
for
most
like your set and
awesome
everything, right?
collection ever. That's the end game.
To have the most
Him
awesome
with the
collection.
Him with the most awesome collection at the end wins. I don't know.
But at what point is it the end of the collecting?
I think it's all based on. Well, it's always obviously going to be very personal, right? Because everyone's end game or even their journey through collecting is going to be very different. Because, like, I might be collecting something in my journey that will be different than what either of you guys are collecting, even though, we do this podcast together. We have a lot in common. My journey is obviously going to be very different, which makes it so my end game is a lot different. I want to get the NES set. I'd like to go for a Super Nintendo set. Dabbling with the thought of Game Boy, but I also want to get back into toy collecting too. I have a lot of the sets of that stuff that I was gunning for already. So I don't know where my end game is going to be, just to the point where I'm happy with filling that nostalgic need, I guess, maybe.
Okay.
For me. Anyways, what about you guys?
Yeah, I say it's good to have collecting goals so you can maybe pinpoint an end. If you wish to have an end, essentially. So like keeps going for like full NES set, so you stay kind of focused on that, and you're like, okay, I only got X amount of games, so this may be a couple more years or months, however long that's going to take, essentially. And then you're like, what do I do after that? It's definitely tough. I would say, does it have to end? Right? I feel like it's just ongoing. Once you reach that end of whatever goal you set, you make the next goal, right? Like you said, I'm gonna go on to this. Well, I completed my NES set. Maybe I want to go get some termites in Army 8.
Absolutely.
Start that there. But certainly filling a need, right? That need to go collect, right? Rather than just going haywire, just going out and you have no direction, right?
Yeah.
Well, Russ, I've noticed like you've kind of really pumped the brakes a little bit on collecting regularly. Have you kind of gotten towards the end of anything personally?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I mean, if you guys had followed me on YouTube and seeing earlier videos of like game hunting, going out like that, I've certainly dialed back collecting retro games. It's just very few here and there. The main stuff with NES, it was kind of like, again, similar to Dave. It's like I want ones I had growing up, certain ones I want the box for, so I'll get those. And it definitely changed when I had gotten my SNES Classic. My friend had modded it, and I had all the games available to me there. So then there was no need to get the game to play it. I could easily play it on that. And I have since gotten one of the NES EverDrives, so I can play the games on original hardware and not have the need to go spend, $1,000 to get little Samson to play it. So then collecting that, it's like, I don't have to. Most of the stuff now that I'm getting is newer gen stuff, whether it's PS5 or PS4 games. I didn't even, I got an email and I was like, I totally forgot I ordered this. There's a new Ninja Gaiden game coming out soon. So they did a sale. There was a collection of the Ninja Gaiden Sigma games on PS4. And I think those came out originally on Xbox and PS3. And I had never played that series. So I was like, I'll grab that. Maybe I'll play that.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you collect other than video games or have collected in the past?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to get a lot of the original Goosebump books. I read a bunch of those growing up. And so usually if I go to the thrift store, right? It's easy to scan the books and you can see that spine label and know it's a Goosebump book.
Hmm.
So I'm collecting those, and I was really big into those choose your own adventure books as well. So I've only got maybe 4 or 5 of those. So that's kind of on my mind if I'm going thrift hunting or to a flea market or game convention. I kind of steer more towards some of those stuff than getting the video games. Because the video games, like I said, I have them on
Right.
other devices. It looks okay on the shelf. And it also too, again, you guys could weigh on in this. What size your space is can really dictate what your collection is. I've only recently moved into a house. I was living with my wife in a condo, and so my game room was the size of a bedroom.
Hmm.
So collecting a bunch of games, I couldn't really display them. Most of my stuff was in boxes. So then
Yeah.
you don't really get that satisfaction of like, oh, I get the games and I put them on the shelf. Mine were like, oh, I got the games. I just put them in the storage bin and maybe I'll see them if I dig them out, if I got to do a video on it or
Hmm.
something like that. So
Right.
certainly having a larger space and you're like, all right, we can fit more things in here. Let's get more games.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about space. I mean, you know me, like the space that I have down here in this room alone is probably, I want to say it's like 220 square feet. It's not big. And Russ hasn't been down here in quite a while. It's gone through a lot of changes. But as far as the collection goes, I'm very lucky because I have most of my collection is childhood toys and I mean, the video games I had to buy because we only had like 13 video games, when I was a kid. I had also, I should say 13 Nintendo games, and I probably had like 15 or so like Sega Genesis games. But my room here consists of a lot of toys, a lot of VHSs, a lot of posters, and like I said, most of it is from when I was a kid, and a lot of my friends joke to me all the time, and they say, "Oh, you never played with your toys because everything is still so clean and it's really well put together." Um, so as far as like an end game goes, I'm more of like a nostalgia person when it comes to collecting the things that I remember
Hmm.
having or playing with as a kid. Uh, I as far as toys goes, I'm not really collecting things that are outside of what I had growing up. There might be a few little things here and there. For instance, we've been talking about this. I had a few Mad Balls, right? But I've been starting to get more into them because I had a Mad Balls book. I had a head popper. I had a couple of the actual Mad Balls. We had some knockoff ones. We had the weird balls, and so I'm exploring that IP in the collection. But as far as like real Ghostbusters goes, or um, Ninja Turtles or anything like that, I'm
Right.
not really going out and hunting for new things to add to that. So I might find something that's cool here and there. I mean, age probably has a lot to do with it too, right? We get to a point where we're like, okay, we're satisfied with where we're at. I have a lot of stuff in storage, like Russ said, and it's just sitting in boxes. Like, what am I going to do with it? I have like a full bin of amiibos over there that are still sealed.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
do not have any room in here to display those.
Yeah.
Why am I attached to those? I don't know. Do I want to just off those and kind of start downsizing the collection? Um, but as far as an end game goes, Keith kind of touched on it where it's um, everyone's going to be different, right? And so I think it's the joy of what you have, uh, not so much like once you're satisfied, but also when you're at a point of it may not be like mentally you're not like saying to yourself, "Oh, I'm satisfied with this." You just kind of get comfortable with what you have,
Hmm.
and then maybe if you see something here and there, you might pick it up. But for me, I'm being very picky at this point with some of the things I'm picking up. So does that mean I'm at an end game? I don't know. Is
Well, it
there
could
no
say
end
co-
game?
collecting habits can change, right?
Yeah.
From how
Correct.
you start it. You
Mhm.
know, you got that passion and thrive. And even, you know, with me and Keith being YouTubers and you wanted to film that experience, that kind of keeps the fire going a little bit. You're like, oh, I'm going to go out game hunting and
Yeah.
find stuff. So then you're more
Mhm.
excited to do that. Whereas if maybe you're not capturing it or sharing it with other people,
Right.
it's not as fun.
And
I went
even
to a
that,
show this weekend. So go ahead, Keith.
like, that'll change too. I feel like as human beings, we go through cycles in our lives too, right?
Right.
So, like Russ is saying, like you were collecting Nintendo games and you were collecting retro games, and now you don't collect as much anymore. You're more picky. But yeah, you know, a couple years from now, who knows? You might have swung back like that. That fire might get ignited again.
Hmm.
We never really can tell the future or what's it holds for any of us, right?
Mhm.
Like I said, I had collected toys. That was what I had done for a long time. I got all the sets of the stuff that I kind of really wanted. And I was like, hey, what's next? And then I sat in that lull for a while and just kind of basked in what I had. And then it's like, you know what? I think I really want to do Nintendo games. So that fire was lit. And now I'm 190 some Nintendo games left. And I do feel myself stumbling a little bit, being ugh, like that fire is maybe a little bit out. So it even makes it
Mhm.
hard to do videos because it's like, is it really the fire there right now? You have to kind of ignite it again or dig down and find the reason you wanted to in the first place, right? So
Yeah.
it flips and changes on you and you don't even know what's happening, right?
Well, it
Yeah.
even would say the rising cost and how it
Yeah.
affects your long term goals. So
Mhm.
retro
Yeah.
game collecting is gone up. So now it's like, well, now I got to spend more for these games if I want the complete set.
Right. And to add to what Keith said, as far as like when you go to a show or you go out hunting and stuff, having that fire, right? I went to a show this past weekend and there was a lot of vendors. There was a lot of toys. I wouldn't say there was a lot of vendors. It was a small show, but there was a lot of vendors that had some decent toys and it had some decent video games and collectibles and things like that. I walked away with one comic book, which the only comic books that I'm collecting are number one issues of 80s toy lines or cartoon series.
Okay.
So, for instance, this weekend I was able to pick up the number one issue of He-Man Masters of the Universe. Uh, and so that's kind of like where my comic stuff is. I have bins of comics in the other room that I haven't touched in years. I have like a near complete set of the Mirage Ninja Turtle set. And every day I'm always like, well, what am I doing with this? Why don't I just get rid of this stuff? Um, so I think what Keith said about, going out and hunting, it kind of also is like, well, it kind of thought in my head, knowing that we were doing this topic,
Hmm.
am I close to some kind of an end? Because I'm not really finding anything that I actually want. Or the flip side was, or am I just being very picky because I know I'm going to Chicago in a few weeks
True.
to the Chicago Toy Show, which is
You'll
like
find a lot more.
700 vendors on 7 buildings. It's going to be a huge vintage toy show. I don't know.
And like just because you're not, you know, you're comic collecting or whatever you have been collecting, maybe that, like I said, that fire has gone out a little bit. Like you were saying, like now you're collecting Mad Balls and the offshoots of that and stuff. So if you'd come across a table that had a bunch of that, that fire would have been there and you would have been excited to collect those, right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of the end game depends on where you're steering and where you're navigating to and what your journey really is. If you get to an end game, maybe it's just something else you become interested in. Maybe it's a sport, maybe it's antiquing, maybe it's something like that, and that maybe your end game on collecting one version of something happens, but maybe there's something else that occupies your time, right? You
Right.
never know.
Opens up a new door. Or like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keith said, you know, maybe something, although I stopped collecting most of the retro games, I'm kind of getting into like the retro tech with the NES. Like I just picked up DIY kits to make your original controllers wireless, and I
Yeah.
ordered a few other like new tech pieces for the NES itself. I just got a new upscaler so then I can play when I live stream, I'm playing on my original NES rather than using the SNES Classic. This way I could kind of feel like more nostalgic with that. Okay, I'm using
Mm.
the older hardware. Um, and again, last night I sat down. Uh, I had played some games, and I sat down and said, "You know what? I got to organize my Nintendo powers. I got them here on the shelf, just all out of order." So I sat down, went through them, and I had a list on my phone. And I've been meaning to. I wanted to get 1 through 50. I feel like that's like the NES to Super Nintendo era and the ones I remember the most. I do have later ones with like the Wii even, and I'm like, there's no nostalgia for those ones, but maybe if I got them cheap. But I still have some missing issues on there. I'd like to go back with those because it certainly brings me back to the time growing up playing Nintendo, Super Nintendo, flipping through the magazine. Some of them even are super beat up. I had where did I put it? Oh, I put it over the one I pulled out last night because I was like, oh, maybe I'll do some content around Nintendo Power. So I looked
Mhm.
up a issue that was March/April, and it had Ninja Gaiden on the cover of it. And opening it up, it was like almost tearing the pages. Like one of the pages was loose that I had just shoved in there, and it's like, ah,
Mm.
it's like, well, maybe I got to get a replacement one for this one.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
do you guys see an end game in sight? I mean, Keith, you
Not
said you're
currently. We're still
yeah.
young, right? I would say, right? We still got time to
Yep.
buy a bunch of more crap we don't need.
Right. I don't see an end game for me because I think it's just going to shift for me. Like
Okay.
I've
Right, right.
shifted once. I think I'll shift. If there is, it'll just be a shift in like a lateral direction to something else, right? Like
Mhm.
Sure.
there's so many toy lines that I'd be interested in digging into. Maybe
Uh-huh.
it'll go that direction once I finish what I'm focused on right now. So I don't know if there's end game for me.
Okay.
Can be expensive.
Well, I would say that brings up a good point. I feel like the only way, truthfully, you'd be like, there's an end game. Maybe something with your situation would change financially, where you
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to fund this hobby anymore
Mhm.
of collecting, and then you would just be stuck with what you have and enjoy that. And that's your end game. Hey, it was a good ride up to this point, but I can't really get anything new. Or, I mean, God forbid, maybe you do have to sell the collection to then fund something else more important. So that could be an
Which
end goal.
again happens too, right? Like
Yeah.
you guys both have kids. You get to that point too with those kids that they're maybe getting into a sports or something like that. And you need a little bit of extra scratch for that stuff. Maybe they're more important, obviously, than your collection. And maybe that's the point where you're like, well, I'll sell some of this and fund that, and then I can spend time with them. You never know what
Yeah.
Well,
situations are going
Yeah.
to change, right?
if only I had that Ninja Turtle scratch, I would sell that
Right.
one to get the scratch.
Oh, that's a rare Ninja Turtle
Right.
action figure.
It's like a $2,500 figure. It's crazy,
Ooh,
like loose. It's insane. I mean, I would say like the consensus is like the I think end game to collecting is kind of far fetched, but like end game to parts of a collection. There's so
Yes.
many different types of
yeah.
collection. I could say I have a collection of Mad Balls. Could say I have a collection of Nintendo Powers, a collection of NES games. I think for me, I'm pretty close to maybe an end game of NES cartridges because, like Russ said, we have the Super Nintendo Classic that's modded, and I have the games that I would want to play on my original Nintendo on my CRT. But maybe there's like a little Samson I know I'm never going to afford. I could play that fine. I don't need the physical cart for it. So, end game is a lot of different variables. But I would say maybe in
For
some
sure.
I've reached the end game, and maybe in some I'm not quite there yet. But I
Yeah.
think as an overall term of end game,
Hmm.
I don't think we're ever gonna stop.
Maybe not. Maybe not. we did reach out to you guys to kind of get your input on it as well. So I'm kind of curious of what you guys had to say about collecting in the end game.
What did you say? What did you say?
Springfield, let's hear from you.
We'll jump over to Instagram.
This was a very popular topic on our social media, I will say.
We got Gingerbeard, the gaming dad, says, I don't see one in sight for myself, as it's the same stuff I have collected all my life and brings back my childhood. The closest thing to a time machine for me.
Very well said.
VHS Crip says, divorce. Everyone knows that. That's the good one. Nintendo Cam. What an interesting question. For me, I want to collect, own, and play games that I missed out on growing up for whatever reason, and have those games available for my kiddos and friends whenever we want. That's cool. So bringing a little bit of your childhood and then passing that down. I can see that.
Yeah, my daughter plays with my my Ghostbusters Firehouse.
I was going to say,
back in the day.
Gwen was taking a bath today and can't take a bath without some Ninja Turtles in there. So I gave her some of my turtles, threw them in the tub. We got Collectosaurus, or not Collectosaurus, sorry, Gameosaurus. Still a great name. I always care about value, but I never sell. If I were smart, I'd sell off what doesn't matter and keep what does. Focus and upgrade. That is another point. It's like collecting for value or how much it is, and almost like an investment wise. Some people can do that. And we got Ties Gaming and Collections. You all have end goals? I've been collecting for the last 3 to 4 years. I missed out on so many games. When I was young, I had to sell my games in order to get the next generation console. Looking back on it, I miss that I don't have that. I want to build up a collection that lets me go back and relive those memories, but not just me, my friends as well. I want them to come over, and if they see a game they remember from their childhood, to pop it in and play. So really, there is no end in sight, and I'm okay with that. My wife thinks differently.
Russ knows all about like selling off a game system and all of their games for something.
Oh God!
Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I did that twice.
Do you know this story?
I do know.
No,
can we discuss that now, or?
I mean, you can make reference to it. Future topic. It's a good one. It's a doozy.
All right, we'll finish up our comments here. Super Monster Party says there isn't any. It's infinity times 2. Just keep collecting.
There you go.
And then we got some comments on our YouTube community page as well. Let's see. I'll jump over to there. Choop. We got Canadian Retro. The goal of my collection was originally to recollect everything I had as a kid. It has expanded a bit beyond the criteria, but I've also sold childhood games that I don't really have much attachment to. Now I'm on the accessory collecting kick. It seems my end game is constantly changing, and in my opinion, that's part of the fun. Another bald nerd. I think I've always collected something. It all just depends on what cool vintage treasures are more available to run into. Just about everyone in my family collects something, so if I'm not finding things for me, I'm looking out for things for the family. We have a wall in our kitchen that is just vintage licensed Wilton cake pans. While I mainly collect video games, vintage toys, sci-fi books, and VHS, other members of the family collect vinyl records, vintage dolls and Barbies, snow globes, vintage clothes, squishmallows. Plenty of collecting to go around. If I really had to think about an end game, it'd probably be either if I ever stop enjoying what I collect, or when I get super old and don't want my kids to have to deal with all my stuff when I'm gone. We got Ricky. Says, personally, when I collect, I tend not to stay on one toy line, but then move to another. But one holy grail I got is a US Digimon D3 Digivice. I got it for $65. So I'm not sure.
Is that like a Pokédex?
I guess it would be similar to something like that in the Digimon world. We'll see.
Yeah.
Colby from Purchase Blurs Thrifting says, I I feel as though this question is a double-edged sword. On one hand, having a goal and sticking with it is one way to look at it. But when it comes to retro collecting, I feel like all bets are off. I'm about 500 deep into the NES library, including third-party titles, and I've always had that wild, unrealistic goal of being able to one day complete it. Things have slowed down collecting for NES dramatically, as I can't really realistically see myself paying $2,000 plus for a little Samson or $15,000 on a stadium event.
Right.
I feel like now I'm adding the titles that I would play and trying to stay away from the pricier garbage titles that, let's face it, only sit on people's shelves. I feel like now with collecting, I may be going for more themed items like my Nintendo Powers, the Super Mario Bros. 3 watch, or video game themed VHS. The market has definitely had an effect on my collecting as well. I can't justify some of the pricing. I guess in conclusion, will I ever stop collecting? Absolutely not. But the current state of things now has certainly changed the trajectory of things for me. Cheers. Thanks, Kobe. Always a good commenter. He always leaves a good story.
Yeah.
We got a few more here. Patty Collector says, I collect keychains, which is a very broad category of things, so I could collect forever. The end game would be to document as much as I could fit into a book, covering everything from antiques, pop culture, modern souvenirs, etc. I feel like I could let this stuff go if it was all through documented. There are certain end games for particular sets or categories, usually. This is due to price. One example is the set for the Super Mario RPG, which are nearing $100 for a single keychain, and they only came out in Japan. Oh, so it was keychain
Wow.
Wow.
RPG. $100 for this little keychain. Wow.
Wow.
Steve V's Man Cave Arcade. I've collected many things over the years: retro games, arcade one-up cabinets, figures, CDs, movies. As of right now, I'm collecting McFarlane live action Batman figures. I'm
Hmm.
a Batman fan and I love all the live action movies. The end game for me is obviously having all the figures from the movies, though it was reported that McFarlane lost the DC license to Mattel and will stop making DC figures next year. I hope to get all the figures I'm looking for before the year is done. If not, I'm hoping Mattel will continue where McFarlane left off, hopefully at the same scale, 7-inch, with the same quality. If Mattel can't deliver, then 2025 will be the end of that collection. That's a good point too. If you're
Yeah.
a certain thing and then it switches companies,
Right?
now your
Or even just
quality isn't up
slightly
to your standard.
changes.
Right. We got River City Ransom. Currently, try to collect everything that can perfectly fit on my shelves that's already set up in my game room. But when/if I move, I'll probably have a bigger game room. Then I'll have more to collect. I never want to have so much stuff that it sits in storage or a closet. I collect what I can fit and display, and that's it.
Hmm.
And finally, Mike says, I don't think there's a true end game to collecting. I'm almost out of shelf space for games, but that would not stop me from selling off some games for others I would want.
So, like,
Quite the popular topic.
to talk on what Steve's versus Man Cave was saying, like, I was collecting these, right? These are I was only doing the Transformers the movie collection that
Mm-hmm.
Hasbro was doing. And this is what they look like, right? They had this nice
Great
plastic
packaging.
backing on it.
Yeah.
Great packaging, right? And then they decided, because we got to get rid of plastic now in this world, right? So instead of having that, now they look like this. Again, good packaging, but I can put my
So
hand in here.
Oh,
Right.
yeah. No. Well, at least
Yeah,
it's a window
we
still.
got rid of that window, right? And some of them, just 1 second here.
Yeah, I will say changing the design on it then affects your urge to get more, essentially.
Went from, here's this Grimlock, right?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
full like mirror. Yeah,
Cool,
you can see
big
through it. Yeah.
window, you can see the character. And then they decided, well, we get rid of that plastic, and now we've got
Oh, just nothing.
Starscream. I can't even
Right,
see
you-
the figure,
Can't see the figure.
so I'd have to open it to see the figure. So
Looks like a model
Right.
kit.
yeah,
It
right.
does.
I kind of just stopped collecting those. So stuff like that will definitely change a person's collection, right? And that would
Right.
be the end of it, right?
Yeah.
Right, because
I see where they're coming from,
you're keeping them in the box, right? If it was someone
right?
else and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna display them on my shelf," that wouldn't affect them because they're gonna open it
Right.
up, display the figure, and you're
Exactly.
like, "I can keep going," but
So, like you're saying, if Mattel changes the size of those figures he's been collecting, that
Right.
might be it for him, right? So I
Mhm.
totally see where he's coming from.
sweet. Yeah, certainly a good topic for sure. Um, maybe there isn't an end for some people.